So in this video I'm going to explain how to solder connections between the motor controller and the encoder, and let me just bring in another one. So these are the connections we're going to be making today. So this is the encoder, and the wires from encoder are going to the motor controller over here, and this is a pretty narrow area where you have to solder them. I'm going to be sharing some tips on how you can do that, and then we're going to be making these CAN wire connections here as well. Now we do need additional power and ground connections here as well. We're going to be doing those as well. And lastly, we're going to be attaching a magnet that came with this encoder onto the actuator over here, and then we're gonna solder these wires, the three wires for the motor over here on this motor controller. So let's start this. So I'm gonna put everything to a side and bring these in. First up, we're gonna be soldering the encoder connections. Now you need 24 gauge wires for these, and I have 4 wires over here that I'm gonna solder. Now you do need 24 gauge wire for this. It's not mentioned on the bill of materials as of now, but if while ordering, be careful to only order 24 gauge wire. And now we are gonna be using 24 gauge wire for this. It's not mentioned in the bill of materials as of now, but if you're ordering these parts, be sure to order a 24 gauge wire. And for these wires, as you can see over here, I have exposed very little area of copper. You don't want to expose too much, otherwise the soldering is gonna be difficult. So I just passed the wire from this side, and I'm gonna place it over here on this double-sided tape, and I'm gonna solder this now. So the VCC connection is done. Now I'm gonna grab the black one and I'm gonna insert it down below to where it's supposed to be. So this is the ground connection, and you need to be sure that it's pushed all the way through on the bottom side, so we don't have any exposed copper on the bottom side. Next up, we're gonna be soldering the SCL and the SDA pins, and first up I'm gonna solder the SDA pin, which is this yellow one. And when inserting this wire from the bottom side, you have to be really careful not to leave any exposed copper on the bottom side, so you have to push it all the way through and solder it in this way. Otherwise, if there is exposed copper on the bottom side, you might risk making a short connection on the bottom side over here. Once we're done wiring the motor encoder, we can place it on the actuator, but we need to follow a step before doing that. We need to place a magnet on the actuator motor like this, and make sure this is a magnet that came with the encoder. Any random off-the-shelf magnet won't work, so make sure this is the magnet that came with the encoder. You can lock that magnet in place using a hot glue gun like this, and once you're done doing that, you can place the encoder on top in this position, and you can fasten it in place using M2 screws and some M2 washers. So now I am gonna proceed to show you how you can do soldering onto this motor controller. Now these solder connections are really tiny, and there's a technique I found that can make the soldering process easier. So we need to attach 4 wires over here and 3 CAN USB wires over here, and then we need to attach this motor windings, which are these 3 black wires. We need to attach them over here, and then we need to attach the ground wire over here, and then we need to solder the V plus or the VCC wire, whatever you want to call it, over here. So in total there are quite a few connections to make, so let's start with the process. So first up, like I have explained, these connections are really narrow, so to make the soldering process easy, I am gonna use a solder flux, and I am gonna open this and I am gonna apply this on these pins over here. So what this will do is it will allow the solder to flow effortlessly and to gather on the connections over here. Next up, I am gonna make a bubble over here on the very first pad that we need to solder the wire on. So I'm gonna try and place a bubble over there. So you have to try to be careful and precise with it. So as you can see, I have placed a bubble over here. It's a really precise job, so you have to really get down there and do a precise job So what I want you to do, and this is a trick that will help you with the soldering, I want you to add a little bit of solder on the tips of these wires on the copper part. So if I'm able to show you, you can see I have attached a little bit of solder on the copper part of this wire, and this will allow these wires to attach effortlessly onto their designated place. So the first connection is the black wire, and I am gonna bring it over here from a side, and I'm gonna bring the tip of my solder iron from the other side. And you have to be careful not to bring this connection too close to the other solder pads over here, otherwise you might risk a short circuit. So as you can see, I have made the black connection over here. Next up is the neighboring solder pad connection. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna place another solder bubble over here. So and once again, as you can see, I have placed a solder bubble over here. So I'm gonna bring this wire from one side and the solder pin from the other side. So there you go, two connections are done. Now I am gonna place another solder bubble next to it, and I'm gonna bring in the next wire, and the third wire has been attached. Now the wiring color scheme I'm using is slightly different than the official documentation, so you can just refer to the official documentation to see which wires you want to attach over here. We are gonna make the last connection over here, which is this one. Okay, all connections are done, and just give them a look, make sure none of the connection is short with any other connection, and if you are in doubt, you can use a digital multimeter to do a continuity test to see if the connections are short or not. Next up, I am gonna place it back over here, and we're gonna attach the CAN bus signal wire over here, and I am gonna place 3 bubbles over here now. So I'm gonna place one over here. Okay, as you can see, I have placed 3 bubbles over here, and you have to make sure not to make them too big, otherwise you might they might like flow into each other. I'm gonna bring the CAN wire bus, and I am gonna solder them one by one in these bubbles now. So first up is the black wire, which is the ground one. Next up, the green one, and lastly we have the yellow one. So I'm gonna attach the last one. Okay, so these connections are done. What we need to do next is we need to attach the motor windings to this motor controller. So I'm gonna turn it the other way around, and we need to attach the 3 motor winding wires over here. So for the orientation of how to attach these wires is, if you have your motor this way around, this wire, the topmost wire, this will go over here, so it will go to this connection, and the middle one is gonna go in the middle one, and the bottommost wire connection, as you can see over here, it will go to the outermost pad over here. So this is the connection scheme. Now I'm gonna solder them one by one. So first up, I'm gonna drop a lot of solder on all 3 of these pads, so the wires sit there nicely. Now I am making hard connections between the motor and the controller. You can attach wires and connectors with those wires, and you can connect these through connectors. That would be the best way, but right now I am short on connectors, so I will be directly soldering them on the motor controller. Okay, so I have grabbed the first wire from this motor, and I am gonna solder it over here. So I have attached a little bit of solder wire already over here, and I'm gonna heat up this solder wire, and then I'm gonna push this connection on there and make sure that this connection is nice and sturdy. Now I'm gonna bring in the second wire, and I'm gonna solder it in the middle over here. So I'm gonna melt this pad, and I'm gonna insert the wire over here, and make sure to cover all the exposed copper and see if it's sitting firmly in there. Next up, we have the last wire, and I'm gonna melt this part, and I'm gonna push this wire in there. Okay, we are almost done with the process. Next up, we want to attach the voltage and ground wires over here. So these two pads. So once again, I'm gonna add a lot of solder wire on these pads. Now grab your ground wire, and I am gonna attach it over here on this side. And once again, you need to make sure it's sitting firmly in there. You don't want to lose connection over here. Lastly, I'm gonna bring in the voltage wire, and we are gonna attach it over here. And we are done with the wiring of a single actuator. So what we have covered so far is the voltage wires, the three wires for the windings of the motor, and if we flip this is the encoder that we just wired, and I have attached a magnet in there as well. These four wires for the encoder over here, and these three wires for the USB CAN signal. So yeah, that's how you solder the motor and the power cables with the motor controller. I'm gonna be making series on how to put together this hand once you have done this for all the actuators. See you in the next one. Cheers.